Relativism's Moral Mission. It's the title of a new article in the latest edition of the April 2012 edition of First Things. With us today, the editor of First Things, professor of theology at Creighton University, Rusty Reno. Good morning, Rusty.
Pleased to be with you.
Hey, it's great to have you along. Quite an interesting article, and you know we live in interesting times, as the old Chinese curse goes, I guess, in terms of religious freedom. And some of these morality plays and stories have new meaning just about at every turn of history. Tell us about your thoughts.
Well, I think it's important for us to realize that when Pope Benedict speaks about the dictatorship of relativism, he's describing a worldview that actually has its own kind of self-righteousness. It seems paradoxical that saying that all moral truth is relative is itself a moral commitment. But if we kind of look at it more closely, I think we can see that it is. I mean, part of if we're soft and flexible about moral truth, and as we were a relativist, then we give people more scope to do as they please. And I think for the moral relativist, that's the underlying conviction that it's better if people are less and less constrained by moral limitations.
You know, I've got some friends that work on the left side of the political spectrum in terms of religion and politics in radio, and boy, there are very much rules that are as absolute as one might see them on the religious side of things for the left.
But they tend to be, some of the most stringent rules are rules against moral judgments. If you see what I'm saying, there's a political correctness, we'll call it that, is a kind of very strictly enforced set of rules. But those rules tend to be the rule that, it is forbidden to forbid. Thou shalt not judge, especially when it comes to questions of sexual morality. That's kind of, you're not allowed to say anything negative there. So that does circumscribe them. And then there's all kinds of practical rules. Don't smoke, use a condom, get your HIV test regularly. So kind of pragmatic, practical rules are very strong. There's a kind of neo-Puritanism out there, in fact, when it comes to health.
In the great disdain to which anyone is held up, lest they make the faux pas of, not following these rules.
Well, see, I'd say that our liberal culture worships the gods of health, wealth, and hedonism. And so those gods do issue their own commandments with a small c. So health, you got to sort of not eat fatty foods. We got Michael Bloomberg here in New York, who's kind of a great worshiper of the god of health. And then wealth, of course, you have to be careful with your career and be practical and make sure you go to college and all that kind of stuff. And then hedonism, that's where we've got to, that's where the left tends to be kind of like a jihad against religion, because gosh, God's authority gets in the way of hedonism. So you've got to smack down the church's authority in order to make room for the God of hedonism.
It's so interesting. You likened the mayor of New York kind of in a puritanical way. I mean, going after fatty and salty foods along with cigarettes and all that.
Exactly. I mean, it's a great paradox that, well, maybe it speaks to the human condition that the human beings, we think we want this freedom that involves sort of doing as we please, but we actually, I think, need to have our lives shaped and disciplined by kind of some kind of clear vision. We have rules. So when we get rid of traditional morality, we get these kinds of half-baked puritanical schemes that kind of come flooding in. But it's interesting with health and wealth, they don't really touch the soul, right, those gods. So, you can sort of follow all the rules, and eat properly and go to the gym and all that kind of stuff. But it's not a kind of deep soul-shaping discipline. And the same thing even for kind of work hard, play hard, pursue your career. Same thing. It's not a kind of discipline of the heart. In the way that a religious discipline and a spiritual discipline really penetrates so much more deeply into the soul. And that's what our age is very fearful of, I think, is very fearful of that kind of deep kind of formation of the heart and binding of the heart. We see that in questions of marriage and questions of commitment, and then, of course, religious authority, which is God's authority, God's call, which is the ultimate kind of claim upon our heart.
Is it just that that's maybe the most scary thing of all is for us? We can put all sorts of effort and decades into, gaining education, trying to do the right things in a healthy way, trying not to bother anyone else, to infringe upon their right to do whatever they want. But the most scary thing of all would be to take that honest look at one's hearts.
Yes, and I think that the moral mission of moral relativism is to insulate people from the danger of that call. Because when God calls St. Francis of Assisi, it's a complete sort of conquering of the soul by God's grace, and that is, people see that, and they're like, I think people are, on the one hand, they're very attracted to it because there's a heroism there that I think everybody thrills to. On the other hand, they shrink from it. It seems very fearful. How could I survive such a deep and profound call? I mean, don't I have to reserve part of life for myself? And so moral relativism, what that does is it pushes the moral demands away, gives us room just to have sort of our time, my time, that I can make decisions about for myself, just on the basis of what I want and not what I am obligated to do or what I'm called to do.
Kind of gets back to just, having different compartments in the life and not letting God into all of those compartments.
Yes, I think that's right. We do compartmentalization as a kind of classic way of doing that. And you think about it, when people say that they're moral relativists or you should be non-judgmental, of course they are. I mean, no one thinks you can murder or steal and things like that. What they're doing is they're compartmentalizing. They're saying there's some aspects, okay, fair enough, you're not allowed to harm other people. So they compartmentalize morality in order to have the part that, oh, yes, there are rules, but no, there are whole swaths of life where there are no moral rules. Or we do this in our religious life. We say, okay, we'll go to church. We give God a piece of our lives, but only a piece, and we save the other parts for ourselves. I always think one of the things I find that a long day at work, and I catch myself, I'll watch TV or have a martini, say, it's a long day, I deserve this. And I know there's something wrong when I'm thinking about what I deserve, And that's when I catch myself and go, okay, I've got a problem here. Because, ultimately God wants the totality of our lives, and not just part. And ultimately, the promise is that if we give God the whole of our lives, we receive it back. He who gives up his life will receive life, but those of us who try to hold on to it will lose it.
Is it something, going back to, again, talking about rules, where moral relativism has a whole set of rules, actually, that need to be followed, lest you get scorned from your hip and liberal friends and colleagues like that? Is it just the fact that, humans are made up to need a certain amount of order?
Yes, I think that's part of it. But also, remember, those rules, as I said, they're a lot of those rules are negative rules. Don't judge. Don't be judgmental. Don't be, don't exclude, et cetera, et cetera. And so, these are rules designed to, I think that basically I found with my kids in school, they were kind of subjected to political correctness in part, and it takes a lot, because we're naturally moral animals. And so it takes a lot of discipline to prevent us from exercising our moral reason. And so people have to be really pretty heavily disciplined not to, actually say, hey, wait a minute, what are you doing? That's wrong. And I found my students, when I taught, they would always say, well, from my point of view, or from my perspective, and those are the kind of ways of deflating our moral judgments so that people don't feel them as moral judgments, but rather as perspectives, opinions.
Talking this morning with Rusty Reno. He's the editor of the Journal of Religion and Public Life, First Things. Interesting article in the current issue, the April 2012 First Things, Relativism's Moral Mission, talking this morning on Morning Air here on Relevant Radio. And it does get difficult, some of these absolute positions, when we think in terms of some of the decisions that had to be made during the waging of World War II.
Yes. And I think that part of what the problem there is that, as I saw with grappling with this question about exceptions, if everything has an exception, if every moral rule has an exception, well, that's moral relativism, right? Everything's relative to the circumstances, everything's relative to the situation. And then these difficult questions like dropping the atomic bomb, do we have to take responsibility ultimately to make everything come out in the end? Is the kind of question that if you're not a religious believer, it starts to seem like, now wait a minute, maybe we are the ultimate arbiters of who shall live and who shall die. And I never quite saw it clearly until I kind of worked through some of my friends were arguing about the pros and cons of Truman's decision. I never quite saw so clearly how belief in God really does make a difference about how we view those kinds of difficult choices. Because ultimately, if we believe God's in charge, then it's not up to us to make sure that things work out in the end. And I think it came home to me with the question of the pro-life question. There are tragic situations when a woman is raped or something. Well, wouldn't you permit the abortion in that case? And I think, as a believer, I say, well, it's not up to me to sort of, solve the problem of evil. It's up to God to do that, and we can't do evil that good might come, as St. Paul teaches.
Hey, Rusty, maybe talk about this concept a little bit in light of some current things with the HHS mandate, for example.
Well, I think that, how do I sum up? The moral mission of relativism is to make things more plastic and malleable. So, one of the things about firm moral principles is that they limit what we can and can't do. And we want to open that up and make it more open-ended and plastic. And obviously, contraception and contraceptive technology and sterilization, these sorts of things, we want to sort of de-link the relationship between sex and reproduction and children. And the desire to de-link that means that then we can do with sex as we please. Of course, this is related to the homosexual agenda and all that kind of stuff as well. And it's a general mentality in our society, and I think that the contraceptive mandate, that the administration is very committed to that view, the view that sex has no relation to anything of moral significance. And I think they were very shocked that there was resistance to the contraceptive mandate.
It sounds maybe a little funny saying this, but I mean, is sex behind a whole lot of the left-wing agenda? I've been even to a seminar looking at creation and how one way of looking at things could have shown things created in a much more compressed time frame than billions of years for things happening on the earth. It all in a way to disprove God. So if there's no God, we can do whatever we want in terms of sex. And this kind of looking at things from a morally relativistic point of view makes whatever we want to do with sex just fine with no guilt.
Yes, I do think sexual liberation has become, the core commitment of the left. I think that's fairly clear. I mean, I think that in the old days it was the workers. The progressives were very concerned about fighting for workers and the rights of workers and labor. But that really has fallen by the wayside. I think the Democratic Party now is the party of secularism and sexual liberation. It's primary. So abortion is the status confessionis issue. It's the issue, the dogmatic issue. You have to agree. You have to be pro-abortion to survive in the Democratic Party. And I think this is very troublesome in our time.
I've known some pro-life Democrats, which there maybe aren't a lot out there, but they said it is so tough to find funding to get some of the heavy hitters that can drum up donations. Once they're attached with anything pro-life, it's like they're not welcome anymore.
Well, and I think it's moving now to gay rights. That's becoming a no, you're not allowed to dissent on that either. And I'm very concerned that that's going to be. We have a contraceptive mandate. I'm very concerned that the next step is using the power of government to enforce a kind of acceptance of homosexuality across the board.
Talking this morning with Rusty Reno from First Things about moral relativism, and big week at the Supreme Court in terms of looking at the health care package and to what degree the court will rule on it. It looks like from yesterday's activity that they aren't going to wait. Some thought they might have to wait until actually someone would maybe be injured to the point of not physical injury, but having to pay for this down the road in 2014 or a bill coming due in 2015. But it looks like they are going to actually address that this week. Any thoughts and insight on that process?
Well, I don't have any kind of inside information about how the court's going to go on this. I do think that I'm sure that the judges are the justices are very. This is a highly politicized decision that they're going to make, one way or the other. I think it's going to be an extremely important decision. I think in retrospect we look back, and I think that the biomedical questions are among the most fraught in our time between secularists and believers, and the sort of government takeover of healthcare just politicized those kinds of debates in a way that I think. If the healthcare legislation is upheld in the long term, we're going to be in a very sort of dire conflict over biomedical ethics, because everything gets federalized and the whole relationship between government and morality becomes much more deeply intertwined.
In the last couple minutes, just to round it up and encourage folks, maybe something they could do in a positive light. But it seems, without doing anything, it's kind of like the old frog in the slowly boiling pot of water. If we increase the temperature gradually enough, the frog won't notice. And, as things gradually move out from under us, is that the type of thing we're looking at?
Yes, I do think that. I hope listeners realize that the contraceptive mandate is just the beginning of what I call the kind of progressive effort to govern by mandate. So it's a regulatory mandate to achieve something that could not be achieved through kind of popular legislation, through democratic legislation. So I think we have to be very vigilant and recognize that this is the beginning of a larger trend that has to be resisted really at every level.
And we've seen a bit of an alliance form, not just those opposing the mandate on moral grounds, but just on the principle of the government trying to take away a basic freedom.
Yes, and I think that it's very reassuring that evangelicals, many of whom don't agree with Catholics on underlying moral principle, nonetheless have stood strong with Catholics in support of religious freedom, which I think is going to be very much under threat as we move forward.
Does this concern you, the moral relativism, in terms of education? It seems like, undoubtedly we should care for God's creation, but there's a certain grade or two in elementary school. Kids come home more fired up about protecting the planet than even protecting their own grandmother.
Yes. One of the strategies for diminishing the strength of traditional morality is to refocus our moral energy on something that's remote. So we can be passionate about something that's not very consequential for our lives personally. I think there's always a danger when Jesus says, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, visit the prisoner, that people think by voting for government programs to pay other people to do it, that we've discharged our evangelical obligation. And similarly, we should be concerned about the common good. But then to sort of expand it to the entire globe is almost absurd. Because, how can I contribute to the common good at such a cosmic level? when in fact it's my neighbor, my neighborhood, my community that I need to be involved in and try to improve the environment for my family and for my neighbors. So that's the kind of environmentalism that puts much deeper demands on us.
So maybe worrying more about taking that cup of cold water to a...
Yeah, the moral and the cultural environment is something that's very polluted that we need to work to try to remediate.
Very good. Well, we're out of time. So much meat in that article, and we appreciate your time this morning. How can folks find out more?
The best place is to go to our website, www.firstthings.com.
Very good. Appreciate those insights and look forward to future conversations as well. There's Rusty Reno, editor of First Things. Thank you, sir.
Great to be on the show.